VenstraMedical is a company that's developing a next generation of cardiac support technology for critically ill cardiac patients. In particular, the technology is designed to provide these patients with the full cardiac support that they need. It's backed by an IP portfolio of multiple granted patents, and we're looking to raise our Series B at the moment to get us through our first-in-human study. So there's a real problem with cardiac patients, many of whom have suffered a myocardial infarct. And if they go into cardiogenic shock, it's a life-threatening situation. Cardiogenic shock is when there's a critically low cardiac output. The patient's heading towards multi-organ failure. They need cardiac assistance, they need it promptly, and they need a high degree of cardiac assistance as well. Unfortunately, this category of patients have a stubbornly high mortality risk of about 50% that's stayed that way for quite some decades. There are other cardiac patients that require cardiac assist, such as very high-risk patients that need to undergo a coronary intervention. So pVADs are becoming the standard of care for these patients. What's a pVAD? A percutaneous ventricular assist device. It's a tiny pump on the tip of a catheter implanted by a cardiologist to provide temporary cardiac support. These technologies exist, but there's an issue with them. The physician can either choose a low-profile, very small catheter device that can be implanted on an emergent basis in a cath lab. However, because of its size, because it's low profile, it can only provide partial support to these patients. Alternatively, the clinician can pick the larger device. Because it's larger, it can provide something closer to full support, but now it requires a surgical cut down, requires an OR to be prepped, can't be done on an emergent basis. At VenstraMedical, we're obviating the need for this choice. We're getting a best of both worlds, if you like. Based on a collapsible, expandable technology, our device collapses into a very small profile catheter, and when it's in situ across the aortic valve, as you'll see in a minute, it's now larger and can pump the full support that the patient needs. In this animation, you'll see our system being deployed through the femoral artery. The device is collapsed into that low profile catheter. It's introduced over the wire. When that delivery sheath is across the aortic arch, the delivery sheath is retracted. The device naturally expands. And you'll see in a few moments the device starts pumping. And when it starts pumping, once that delivery sheath has been retracted, it draws blood from the left ventricle, ejects it into the ascending aorta, essentially takes over the function of the left ventricle, and importantly, it reduces the myocardial oxygen consumption for these critically ill patients who have suffered a myocardial infarct. At the cessation of therapy, maybe a few hours, maybe a few days, it's retracted back into the low profile catheter. So we've completed our engineering development of the device all the way through our preclinical animals, multiple animals, using a 9 French delivery system. Definitely produced full cardiac support. In fact, in a recent animal, we produced up to 9 liters per minute. Very successful implantation, retraction into a 9 French sheath. And the real, I guess, differentiating factor of our technology, as I alluded to before, is the ability to provide full support. Now, when we talk about cardiac support, we often talk about the flow that a device generates, but we also have to talk about the pressure that it generates to the blood. Your and my left ventricle is pumping flow across the aortic valve, but it's also generating an increase in pressure. Our device, which we believe is the most powerful pVAD that we're aware of, can generate 5 litre per minute output while generating an increase in pressure of 80 millimeters of mercury, or alternatively, say 7 litres per minute at 60 millimeters of mercury. And it's important. There is a dose-dependent reduction in infarct size for the level of support that is provided. So partial support, you see there, the bar in the center, produces a relatively small reduction in infarct size. Total support, much greater reduction in infarct size. And that's really important because the smaller the infarct size, the less chance that that patient's going to subsequently go into heart failure. So how much support is required? Well, we have data from LVAD patients over many years, and you can see the blue circle there is the typical pressure and flow required from these critically ill cardiac patients. You can see some patients require up to 6.5 litres per minute of output, some require up to 80 millimetres of pressure generated. And overlaid on that circle is our performance curve, showing that we can generate the pressures and flows required of the vast majority of these patients. And we do so in a very small profile system. It's 9 French, which is 3 millimetres. It's actually really incredible to see a device pop out of such a small catheter, expand, and then be able to pump the flows and pressures that we get from this device. So we've largely de-risked the project from a technical perspective. We generate full support in a very low profile system, successful preclinical animals, and all done at clinically acceptable low levels of hemolysis, which is blood damage. And I'm proud to say that we've done all of that having spent less than $7 million over the life of the company. And we've been able to do that because of a great team, a team that have done it before. We're not reinventing the wheel. You'll see here multiple people that have developed pVADs before. I've been in the circulatory support space for about 25 years, and my co-founder, cardiologist Dr. Suku Thumbar, is a pVAD implanter himself. The same can be said for our great medical advisory board, all of which have had pVAD experience, and in fact some have written pVAD guidelines in the past. And it's great and convenient to have 2 Mayo Clinic doctors not far from our operational centre in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I alluded to before our IP. We have a portfolio of 7 granted patents, 3 in the US, 3 in Japan, 1 in Germany. Priority dates go back quite a few years, so we're very happy with our powerful IP position. Let me talk about the market for a minute. Many of you may know this market because of the acquisition by J&J of Abiomed for $17 billion. I think last year the revenues in the industry were estimated at about $1.5 billion. It's growing at double-digit figures. The current addressable market is estimated at up to $8 billion. The average selling price for one of these disposable catheter pumps is north of $25,000, so very exciting. But that's not the end of the story. There's more blue sky potential yet. There's new indications coming along for pVADs. STEMI is a particular type of heart attack, if you like, and a lot of preclinical data has suggested that rather than wheeling the patient into a cath lab and putting in a stent straight away, if you put in a pVAD first for a while before you unblock the coronary artery, reperfusion injury is minimized and infarct size is reduced. Now, if that indication is approved for pVADs, it about doubles the existing large market for this technology. And key opinion leaders are already opining that pVADs will become the standard of care for these STEMI patients. It seems that rarely does a month go past without some good news for the pVAD space. News about the efficacy with cardiogenic shock patients, updates to clinical guidelines, reimbursements in place at about $72,000 for the implant of a pVAD. In terms of our schedule, we're planning to get to first in human by the end of 2025 and then move on to our pivotal studies, the first one being for the indication of high-risk PCI. And finally, a bit on our funding history. We started the company in 2018, got some non-dilutive funding and our seed round in 2021, raised our Series A at the end of 22, and we're now looking to raise $25 million to get us through and complete our first in-human study. So thank you very much. We very much look forward to getting through our first in-human study and getting this great technology into the hands of clinicians and, more importantly, benefiting patients. Thank you very much.